Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Talking Shit About with me, Elizabeth. So, fun fact, I've been ranking in the top 100 education podcasts in Honduras, which is super fucking cool. So, shout out to everyone in Honduras. If anyone from Honduras would like to come on the show and talk about your country, I would love to learn more. I'm sure my listeners would too. Sorry for Marty crying in the background, but if you're listening to the show, you know the drill by now. At some point, you will hear my fiance enter the room and then exit the room. And then you might hear me talking with my mouth full. I'm sorry, I forgot to eat, and we recorded this at night. And so I was a little mashed potato brains. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, back to business. This show comes out the first Friday of each month, and on it we talk about something we love, something we hate, and hopefully by the end we've learned something. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk some shit. Here we go. Hi, Zach.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Okay. Holy fucking shit. I was just talking about how tired I am, and I'm so glad I'm not the one doing the talking today. Although I'm usually not doing that much, but like, really not today. Because Zach's here, and he's going to talk to us about Alexander the Great, who I know nothing about except that maybe he's the person that decided fuck was a bad word. That's about it. I don't really know anything else, so we're all going to be learning together unless you paid attention in history class. I'm sure we probably talked
And
about him
unless
at
you
some point.
got taught a better history class than I ever got in high school.
Oh, you didn't learn
Oh,
about him in school?
we did, but we didn't learn any kind of. He was Alexander. He conquered a bunch of stuff. It was important. And, I didn't really learn much of this until later. I want to note real quick, I am not. Every history podcast I've ever listened to starts with, I'm not a historian, but I cannot emphasize how much I am not a historian. I am a comic book nerd that likes to read about ancient history.
Oh, yeah, introduce
Uh,
yourself while we're here.
yeah, I'm. This is going great. That I have been on a couple of times. I think I've been on twice now before this.
Yeah, yeah,
I
this is your third.
Yep. Beth and I have been friends for God, going on 10 years now, and
Wow.
I run the podcasts General Nerdery, Word Balloons, and Noob Island over on the Earworm Network. And when I am not being a gigantic fucking comic book nerd, I have a long-running history in ancient history. The farther back you can go, the more interested I am, which has kind of the problem is going as far back as I want to go of what's the earliest recorded history we can find is we don't have much. So you end up reading about stuff a little farther in, like Alexander the Great, because it's still almost 2,500 years ago before the Roman Empire. But some of the earliest bits we have where we have actual detailed accounts, which I guess kind of segues into some of my stuff here. Today we are barely going to talk about Alexander, even though this is Alexander the Great Part 1, because I was talking about doing this podcast and realized that pretty much everyone I was talking to had no fucking clue who Alexander actually is, other than he's, everyone knows the name Alexander the Great, but we don't necessarily know who he is. Which makes sense.
Hmm.
Again, he's 2,500 years ago. And he sits at an interesting point in history because we have almost no actual sources of his writing or of what's the term? Period sources. Bob knew Alex, and Bob wrote about knowing Alex. But we have a ton of writing from people about 200 to 300 years later who did have those sources. So everything we have is secondary sources, but we have more than we have about most other people. The only, I want to say the only primary source we have about Alexander himself is his writing on like a single temple somewhere. I was thinking about this. I actually got looking into like, is there conspiracy theories about Alexander the Great? Because there's conspiracy theories that 300 years of history in the Middle Ages don't exist, that we have way more information on than we do on Alexander. Oddly, there's not many like he was a hoax, but probably because he conquered so much and had such a big influence on the world around him. And it helps that stuff like we don't know where Alexander the Great ended up. If we might get to it in the next episode, his body is long missing, and people went over entire wars over who would control his corpse. But we do have his dad's body, which is fascinating to me. His dad, Philip of Macedonia, or Philip the Barbarian, which is just my favorite name of all time, because when I think of Philip, yes, I don't think of like, here's Conan. I think of like Phil from accounting. And so the idea of like Phil from accounting taking over a lot is just amazing to me. Before we get started, and I know you said, oh, I don't have to talk, I am going to make you talk a little bit here because I have 2 questions for you, because I'm just curious where you're at in this.
Okay.
What do you... I'm sorry. What do you know about Alexander the Great?
I can't remember if I said this on mic or before we started recording, but
you said he thought the word fuck was bad.
Yeah, so in my senior year of high school, my English teacher was telling me the history of swear words and mentioned some wasp, some white Anglo-Saxon Protestant motherfucker, not necessarily Protestant, but the vibe, you know what I mean. He decided that the words fuck and bit, just like a bunch of swear words, were swear words. Like before you could just like say them and it wasn't a big deal. But he was like the guy that said, nah, y'all can't say this. But now that you're giving me that timeline of 2,500 years ago, I'm thinking of somebody else. I'm probably
off by
thinking
about
of
1,000 years there, I think.
Yeah. 1,500. So that's where I'm at. I'm 1,000 years away right now.
No, that's great. This is what's interesting to me, because I'm the giant nerd that I am who has read all about the ancient Near East. A lot of this stuff I was like, oh yeah, I know this, and realized that, oh no, most people don't spend times reading about the Hoplite Formation. Okay, do you know anything about the Achaemenid Persian Empire?
Gosh.
No is a perfectly fine answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just say I'm gonna go with the short answer, and the short answer is no.
Okay, so the only way that you might know the Achaemenid Persians, and you probably wouldn't even place them as that name if you don't know ancient Greek history, the Achaemenid Persians are the bad guys in the movie 300.
That's what I was thinking of, and then I was gonna say no. That's probably not. That's not knowledge. You watched a movie, so that is exactly what I was thinking of when. Okay.
A horrifically inaccurate movie, but one that I remember enjoying. That I've been kind of scared to watch again because I like enjoying it.
I like having it as a memory of enjoying it, and yeah, agreed. Next.
So, Alexander the Great is a not quite Greek man whose father took over all of Greece, and that he used the greatest army daddy's money could buy to create the biggest empire that had ever been seen in the world, stretching all the way from Greece to halfway through India in the 4th century BCE. So about 300 years before Julius Caesar. Okay. He was also a megalomaniacal drunk who thought that he was descended from multiple Greek heroes, including Heracles, which would be the Greek version of the name, whose empire literally could not survive his death. The moment he dies, all of his generals tear his empire apart like a pack of wolves on a dead moose and destroy everything. The reason he is important, beyond the fact that no one would come close to an empire that size until maybe the Romans, but definitely the Mongols, is he Hellenizes that area and ends basically form of the world that's existed for about 6,000 years at that point.
You said he Hellenized it?
Hellenized, it basically means he made it all fucking Greek.
Ah, okay.
The modern world, in a lot of ways, is able to exist the way it does because he came in and brought in Greek influence. For example, on some of the scale, Cleopatra, a few hundred years later, probably one of the most famous Egyptians of all time. Yes?
Possibly not Egyptian?
She's not Egyptian. Yeah. She is a descendant of one of Alexander's generals who had taken over, or Alexander conquered Egypt when the empire was torn apart. Her ancestor, whose name blanking off the top of my head, which is driving me nuts, takes control of Egypt, and his family will rule Egypt for a few centuries after that, ending when Cleopatra dies and Egypt is conquered entirely by Rome. The reason Cleopatra was so beloved by the Egyptians is she's the first one of them to bother to learn the Egyptian language. So that's what I mean of they came and Greeked all over the stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, Alexander himself is not Greek. He is Macedonian. The difference is largely academic, if we're being honest. It's kind of Greek, not Greek. It's in the same way that America and Canada are going to share many cultural similarities, but Canada is not America in the same way that the US is. That's not a great example, but like Greek, not Greek is about the best I can get to.
All right. That sounds familiar. So you're ringing some bells. They're very quiet, but they're ringing. And that was my ankles. Did you hear that?
Frederick. No, I did not.
What's that? Oh.
I said I did not. Apparently you messed up your ankles. I wonder if you meant Frederick the Great decided, or Catherine the Great decided that fuck was a bad word. She was a Russian queen. I could see her being pissed about that. I'm pretty sure
it was a dude. I bet it was some British motherfucker.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Anyways, so as a real quick, I mentioned that he ends what is known as the ancient Near East. This is a culture that really starts forming in what is known as the Levant. I'm going to go real quick through this stuff, or as close as I'm capable of real quick about my favorite subject. The Levant, which is the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates. It is also known as when it was coming up in school, it was known as the cradle of civilization. These days, we're more honest about the fact that there are a lot of those. But anyways, people started populating it around 6,000 BCE, so about 8,000 years ago, and is the location of some of the earliest cities in the world. That's important because this cultural milestone of there are many different cultures going on in this area over time, including the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. The only reason that's important is because they all follow a same, I guess, vibe. That's the worst way to describe it, but like in the same way that we came from the British culture in a lot of ways, like the white American culture comes from Britain. Assyria from Akkad, Babylon comes from whatever, and it puts the scale on stuff. Alexander is called the last king of kings in a lot of cases. King of Kings was a title first adopted by the Akkadians almost a little over 2,000 years before Alexander. So we talk about America being a young nation because we are 250 years old. I mean, if we go from when the first colonizers appeared at Plymouth Rock, maybe 400 years old. This was a lineage of cultures dating back over 2,000 years, which is my favorite fucking part of it.
Yeah.
It's
we're not going to be around for 2,000 more years.
No. And I should be very clear, that is not one culture. That's not Akkad or Persia that entire time. Babylon had like 3 different empires during that period, but there was the same kind of cultural touchstones that they all fell back on, including similar methods of war.
War's
So
always
the
the same.
war never changes, except for
Oh, that's it.
Alexander going to come in and change everything. But Achaemenid Persians are kind of the last of the great empires to follow this line of style of life. They come from the same area. They come originally from somewhere in the Iraq-Iran area. It's a little unclear, partly just because obviously those nations didn't exist yet. They started about 2 or 3 centuries before Alexander the Great Macedonians. With the fall of the Assyrians, made a vacuum, and a man named, oh my god, I just blanked of a person I've spent too much time reading about.
You can make up a name. I won't know. I won't know any better. Esophagus Pilates. That
I'm
sounds
almost
great,
there.
right?
I'm googling it. Cyrus the Great. We're
Mm.
talking about the Persians right now. We are talking about the enemies that Alexander is going to conquer.
Ah.
Cyrus the Great creates the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and in a generation conquers pretty much everything around that area. His son will go conquer Egypt, which has never happened before, really ending Egypt as a dominant power in its own right. And his son is killed, and the third king of kings of the Persian Empire will end up taking over a bunch of Greek city-states on the mainland, because Greece is not. Greece sent out a bunch of colonies called the Anatolian Greeks. The Anatolian Greeks call home to the Greeks, the mainland Greeks, for help. And to be honest, no one quite knows why they thought it would work, because the Greeks were not an organized country like we think of them. They were a bunch of different city-states. Athens was its own city-state. Sparta was its own city. They had their own spheres of influence, but there wasn't just like Greece.
Mm-hmm.
Greece as a concept did not exist. One of the city-states, either Athens or Sparta, sends a message to the King of Kings, Darius, this one, and says, hey, don't conquer the Greeks, or don't conquer these Greek colonies. These are ours. They're connected to us. You'll have to fuck with us. And poor Darius had to be like, who even sent me this letter? Who are these people threatening me right now? Like, what the fuck?
Hmm.
Because he's already controlling a country that is basically, or an empire that controls the entire Middle East, down to Egypt, into Afghanistan. It's huge already. And these fucking Greeks pop out of nowhere being like, don't fuck with us, we have like 10,000 people. Not even a thing. But the Greeks manage to piss off Darius, and he sends a battle that the Greeks somehow win. And this is like a small expeditionary force. This is like, the Greeks are the farthest edge of civilization for this guy. He sends some people to like, hey, you were mean to me, so I'm gonna take you down. And the Greeks managed to win it at a battle called the Battle of Marathon, which is only, marathon is where we get the word marathon, and it's all because a runner ran, I don't know, something like 20 miles to go get help or something. This leads to, well, shit, you beat the Greek, or you beat the army of the King of Kings of Achaemenid Persia. We can't have that, so we're going to send our main army at you now. Mm-hmm. So it takes us about 10 to 15 years, but the Achaemenid Persians send a giant peacekeeping army to, I guess, quote unquote peacekeeping, to take on Greece. Mm-hmm. This is end of the world for the Greeks, because if they lose, their culture is done. If the Persians lose, they just lose an army. That's not a big deal. The first opening battle of this is the Battle of Thermopylae, which is the battle of the 300 Spartans against the Persians. It's what the movie is based off of. Yes, it is. Yes. One of the greatest last stands of history. It's also mostly a giant lie. There were 300 Spartans, but there were like 4,000 Greeks before that. the 300 Spartans just held the place while the rest of them dipped. So this is known as the Greco-Persian Wars, and it is, as I said, end of the world for the Greeks. Not a big deal for the Persians. And during this time, the Persians are coming into different cities and being like, all right, you can give us submission or we can conquer you. These are your two choices. Most of Greece, and importantly for this, Macedon, which will someday become Alexander's country, submit. The Thebans submit. Thebes is one of the three big cities. The guy who rules Macedonia during this era, where they're putting soldiers towards the Persian armies to conquer the rest of mainland Greece, is also named Alexander. It's Alexander's ancestor. Alexander the First. I think Alexander is, yes, he's Alexander the Third. So the Great is the third. Long story short, and people who love this era of history are probably dying at my terrible explanation of it. The Greeks, mostly Sparta and Athens, eventually push out the Persians, who just decide that, well, we've conquered half of what we wanted already. We burned Athens to the ground, and we brought back a bunch of money and new land. Whatever. We can just let those guys go. It's treated by the Greeks as this great, we've broken Sparta, or we've broken the Persians. Their leader is a shattered man who will forever be defeated, or traumatized by this defeat. And it kind of looks these days, as we learn more and more about Persia, that he just was like, whatever, man, I'm just gonna pay attention. You're to other stuff. You're more trouble than you're worth. And we partially know this because most of the people leading the Greek rebellion ends up working for Xerxes and the Persians later on in life. They just went, well, okay, can we, you guys have a lot of money. Can we just be soldiers for you now, but still just like mercenaries? Which the Persians thought was great. Hiring Greek soldiers was super effective. And the reason for that is what is known as the hoplite. The hoplite is the standard Greek soldier. Persians, ancient Near East people, for the most part, didn't use heavy armor. They did a lot of spearmen. They used a lot of wicker shields. The Persians in particular leaned super heavy on archery. The line in 300, our arrows will block out the sun, was not an exaggeration. There was something like they could fire millions of arrows in an hour during a battle, because they would have, if you have 10,000 archers, which is not a wild number for some of what they could do, who have 100 arrows each. Yeah, that's just
that's what was coming into my mind. I couldn't. Last pod.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It breaks my. I'm wearing my Last Pod t-shirt. That's perfect.
Hey.
It breaks my brain a little bit every time I stop to think about that, and it's interesting because we think of cultures going up creatively, what they can manage. We think of just instead of in the graph of how cultures grow, it's think of kind of permanent growth of technology advancing. But you jump forward 600 years, 1,000 years, and armies are putting out armies of 1,000 people. These guys are putting out 10,000 archers. Unfortunately for the Persians, archers are not incredibly effective against hoplites, because hoplites were heavily armored, or at least big ass metal shield, all heavy in a row with a spear, and they just marched in a straight line. I keep trying to use hand motions to show this to you, and not only is this an audio, we don't have video on, but pretty much it was a shield wall with a bunch of spears poking out. and you could lift everyone had helmets. You could lift up people in the back ranks because it tended to be groups of like 10 by 10 people or 100 by 10 people, whatever rows. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, you would lose people, but the archery, but you just had to survive enough through the archery stuff. And then once those hoplites got close, there was not much the Persians could do. The Persians decided the way to deal with this was just to, one, pay the Greeks to fight each other, because the Greeks could not get along unless someone from the outside was attacking them. Or two, just hire the Greeks yourself. About a century after the Greco-Persian Wars, a man named Xenophon joins a battle of a civil war in Persia and is about to win, but the guy they're working for is killed in the battle. And they go, well, fuck. And they write one of the best adventure stories I've ever read is the story of Xenophon and his 10,000 hoplites just fighting their way back to Greece, marching, fighting, doing whatever they do, because the Persians just don't really know how to deal with them.
Just boys being boys.
Basically, yes. There's this amazing bit where they find the ruins of an ancient city that is... It's Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. We know that now. He didn't know what the fuck it was. And it was bigger than anything that the Greeks could even imagine building, and it was ruins in the sand. It's like in any post-apocalyptic movie where someone finds themselves in like New York or LA, and like, holy shit, what even is this? Sorry, lost my spot there for a second.
You're good.
So we're going to bump forward a little bit here to the actual Macedonians, because that's technically what we're supposed to be talking about this entire time. Okay. The Macedonians, as I said, were a Greek, not Greek culture led by the Argead dynasty. The Argeads was the family. It's a little unclear if it was just a specific family or a clan, but for whatever reason, it was just kind of accepted in Macedon that only the Argeanians could lead. However, that didn't mean that it was easy to like figure out the dynastic line of who's going to take over, because the Argead dynasty was polygamous. The other Greeks were actually very judgmental of them because they're like, I just have the one wife. And Philip, who we'll be talking about today, had 7.
Oh, out of boy.
You know, I am all for polyamorous relationships. I don't think this was the most healthy way to go about it. Like, it wasn't technically a harem; it was 7 queens, but it was, yeah. I've heard them describe.
What you doing with all those wives? You can, yeah.
I have heard the Argead dynasty described as like an organized crime group that is controlling a country. They were, if you put the Macedonians of this era into like a Conan the Barbarian novel, you'd be like, this is unrealistic. This is going too far. They were the weirdest, most murderous bastards that you could possibly think of. They're amazing. I would hate every single one of them with an unholy passion, but because they died 2,500 years ago, they're just fun instead.
Yay! Tell me more.
It's the fascinating thing of the farther away you get from the events of history, the easier it is to, I don't want to say whitewash their terrible things, but like, someone dies yesterday and it's a tragedy, and someone dies 2,000 years ago and it's just interesting. Yeah, I know.
I mean, it can be, I don't know. It can also be tragic when it's, yeah, I guess, I don't know.
It's still sad, don't get me wrong. I'm not like, haha, these people died where it's funny. But like, Alexander the Great or his dad Philip are objectively bad people, but they are great interesting figures in history because of the stuff that they did. And there is a thing about history where the farther away you are from it, the kind of easier it is to look at bad things or bad people doing bad things dispassionately.
Well, there's like a degree of separation because, oh, that those people aren't alive anymore, and they're like that generation is not alive anymore, and therefore, the wound is quote unquote healed from whatever
Not
trauma that
only is that
was.
generation not alive anymore, the world that they lived in isn't even close to alive anymore. Like, it's, you might as well be looking at a different planet in some cases when it comes to a lot of this. It's in the same way that, the pharaohs are interesting, but they were all pretty objectively horrible human beings. Or, I mean, he's fictional, but if you actually look at what King Arthur would have quote unquote done as a person, the dude was a lunatic, but it still
Was he
makes
a
a good
cool
bedtime story.
lunatic or a bad lunatic or a gray area lunatic?
In King Arthur's case, it depends on if it was the English version of the stories or the French version of the stories. But
Okay, well, maybe we'll save that for another episode.
yeah, we'll do
I
that.
don't want to get us on a tangent. Yep. Stay
So
focused, Elizabeth.
stay focused, Zach. It's the hard part here. So Philip himself, Philip II of Macedonia, was born either in 383 or 382. We should be clear on here. Picking a year is incredibly difficult in this era because it is before we use the Julian calendar created by Julius. I think Caesar, but I'm not sure. It's a
Mm.
Roman calendar. That calendar doesn't exist for another 350 years or so, another few more
Okay.
centuries. And the
Yeah.
Greeks didn't judge a year the same way we did. We used the lunar cycle, they used something else that I don't remember. So,
Something wrong? No, I'm just kidding.
sure, whatever. Uh, but it means that translating things to a specific year is sometimes a little shady. He was the youngest son of Amenitus III and Eurydice, and he had two older brothers, Alexander II and Perdiccas III. Also, as a side note, we are entering into more of the military history area of this. There will be periods where I'm reading stuff off because military history is not my forte.
Mm.
Now, Macedon was in incredibly bad shape. And after his brother, Alexander II, was assassinated by the Philip was sent to Thebes as a hostage. Now, when we think of hostages today, we think of like someone's robbing this bank and has taken a hostage and has a gun to the head. Like, we think of like very immediate, in the moment hostages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't remember. Have you watched Game of Thrones?
Oh, yeah. That I want to do a series on Game of Thrones. If anybody wants to come on and talk about Game of Thrones, let's do it.
I'm
Let
not
me
your guy on
ask.
that one, but I'm going to use that as an
Yeah, I know.
example. So in those early seasons, there was the shithead kid from the naval people. The main,
Oh,
I don't remember his
oh,
name.
fuck. What is his name?
I remember he flew
Theon.
the
Theon
system
Greyjoy.
for real. That's the one. So Theon Greyjoy was a hostage at House Stark. Basically, his father lost the war, and Theon was sent to live with the Starks, partly because the Starks would actually treat him like a human being, and partly to keep the Greyjoys from going to war again. It was a very common thing back in the day. We've beaten you. Now you're going to give us, say, 200 of your highest ranking family's kids to come live with us. We will take good care of them. We'll educate them. We will do all sorts of stuff, which one will make them like us more because they're growing up in our culture. But two, because if you attack again, we're going to slaughter those fucking kids. So it is a weird relation in he is a hostage. He is there to keep Macedon from starting any shit. However, he is also being raised by the Theban nobility and watching the military of Thebes, which at the time was the greatest military in Greece, making it one of the best militaries in the world, revolutionize what Greek warfare was up to that point in a fascinating group called the Sacred Band, which was 300 gay lovers all fighting together as like the elite unit of.
Aww.
It's a little unclear if they were all lovers to each other, if it was just like a giant orgy, or if it was just 150 pairs of gay lovers.
150 guys, just friends hanging out.
Yeah, 150 sets of roommates. These guys, the Sacred Band is the tip of the spear that smashes Sparta, really defeating the legend of Sparta being the ultimate Greek army. I mean, the Spartans were already tough, and they had been fucking living off of that legend of the 300 for centuries at this point. But the other military forces of the different city-states were finally catching up. Now, it's unclear if Philip was actively trained in military strategy while in Thebes, but it's thought that he must have, because he left another weirdo Argead, and he comes back and quickly creates the greatest military that the world has ever seen up to that point.
How do you do that?
Mostly by changing up spears. It's weird to say, but kind of that's what it was. He looked and watched how how the Hoplites were fighting, and he specifically turned the style to counter it. Now, it's thought that the Macedonians probably didn't even have hoplites. They had light troops and they had great cavalry, but they didn't really have a good way to counter the other Greek soldiers. So he creates what is known as the Phalangites, or the Macedonian Phalanx. The Phalanx is a bunch of fucking hoplites. Now, as I said before, right?
Yeah.
The Phalanx was like people, 100 wide, maybe 10 ranks deep. Each one has a spear about 10 feet long and a big-ass shield. The way that Philip decided to work around this was he made it, instead of like a long line, basically a full square. So it was generally like 100. The first phalanx was a 10 by 10 square with very experienced troops. Later on, 16 by 16. And it was just these like squares of moving soldiers, and he upped the length of the spear to somewhere between 20 and 30 feet long. Which is absolutely insane to imagine trying to use. But what it meant was he could stab you 10 to 20 feet before you could stab them. They also had shields, but they were a smaller shield that hung out on the arm, as opposed to like, here's my big shield and here's my spear in the other hand. This let him counter the Greek hoplites, and then the cavalry, which, as I said, was already fantastic, was able to just smash everything else or like run stuff down. And it became the Macedonian style to basically have one strategy that they were real fucking good at, and it was the hammer and anvil. You set your people up in the middle, generally your phalanxes, as we will hold this spot, and then the people from the sides are coming in and crushing the opposing army between your anvil, your people in the middle holding the spot, and the people coming in on the sides crushing. In a lot of ways, it was kind of like he invented a spike cushion and then knights. And it's not really knights as we know them, but it's the closest comparison that I really see. He also made them a professional army and used them every year of his life until his death. It was the almost certainly untrue rumor of the time is that there was no dedicated ground troops, foot troops before Philip made them, that they were just like basically fight in a barbarian horde. This is, as I said, certainly not true. They probably just didn't have hoplites.
No, I was trying to come up with some sort of pun, but I got nothing. Nothing.
Anyways, after Philip's other older brother dies, so when his first older brother, King Alexander II, dies, he is sent to Thebes. He returns in 364, and then 5 years later, his second older brother, Perdiccas, dies in battle. He appoints Philip as regent for his son, but Philip just ends up taking over instead. Like, well, I guess I could rule this country until my nephew is in charge. Or I could just gank my nephew and take charge,
Yeah.
which is usually what happened when you made a regent. Like, I don't know why people kept being like, yes, you will look after my family. And they're like, yep, sure, totally won't murder them the moment that you're dead.
Damn, I feel bad about like killing bugs sometimes. Imagine like killing your family just to like, what even? Come on.
Death was so much more prevalent back then. And, like, I'm not justifying it. Don't kill your nephew. But, like, you
It was
know,
just the thing.
yeah, I mean, literally it was, especially because they had some fucking kids. So in a lot of cases, you might not even fucking know this kid very well. Not that, still don't kill them, but it was not uncommon, basically, for women to just start having babies as soon as they can, and keep having babies until having babies killed them, because the infant mortality rate was ridiculously high. In the Roman times, it was something like you had a 60% chance of dying before you reached the age of 12, and once you reached the age of 12, you were probably okay.
Damn. And then you only live till
Well, I
like
mean,
what, 30?
it was actually much higher. That's an ongoing, like, kind of myth of, oh, they died so young, and the reason is they look at the average age, and the average age, like, they died at like 30, but that's because so many people died at the age of like 5 that
Mm,
it fucks with the I don't remember if that's mean or median. I don't, but
the
the
data,
math.
the data.
But I mean, still, yes, you live to like 40, 50, 60 maybe. If you're rich, you could live up to like 80, but you had to be pretty fucking rich. After Philip starts, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, it used to be like that. It's definitely not gonna be like that now. Not with our system.
Yeah, I
Fucking.
know.
And, oh yeah, I was on my drive home. I was like, I don't know anything about Alexander the Great, but I am so prepared to blame so many of today's problems on this man. I'm ready for it. Like I've been watching the system just do its fucked up, stupid things, and I'm like, I need something to get angry at. So I'm gonna get angry at this guy.
I
Sorry,
don't know
aside.
if we can blame capitalism on him, but like, yeah, the culture that he conquered, the Persians actually didn't trust merchants for the most part. They used to insult the Greeks by basically saying, you have a marketplace, like you have a place where people go and lie to other for money. Real quick, as a note, because again, practice polygamy. Philip II had 7 wives. Adata, the daughter of, all of them were either daughters or sisters of a major king or general or someone for political gain. Philip played the game of politics better than, well, far better than his son ever did, who was just like, well, I'm gonna kill him. Adada, daughter of an Illyrian king. Phila, the sister of Darius. Let's see, a woman named Nicelopolis. Olympias, who is the mother of Alexander. Philemena, Meda, and Cleopatra, but obviously not the
Right.
Cleopatra we think of. Cleopatra is a Greek name. Now, Olympias is the important one. Olympias is fucking amazing. I will try and have more on her next time. She was from a different country, a Molossian, and she was a member of the cult of Dionysus, which is a
Ooh.
quote orgiastic snake worshipping cult. And it's rumored that she slept with snakes in her bed every night. So
Ooh,
basically, she was
saucy.
a snake witch from the barbarian lands, even compared to these barbarians who fucked a lot. She's awesome.
Good for her. Atta girl. There we go. That's a
Now,
genuine atta girl.
how much of that is true? We honestly cannot know. It is a thing about history that with the farther back you go in ancient history, the more you kind of just have to accept that a lot of it is rumor and you're never going to know which one is which. Like what's rumor and what's cold hard fact. It's only at this stage in history, it's only been a couple hundred years that they really were telling history in the style that we think of it today as like pretty dispassionate. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. The Egyptians, for example, tended to use. They would talk about battles that they had, and they would talk about how many people were defeated or how big the opposing army was, but they would make it sound like it was just the pharaoh fought them all, and the pharaoh did it himself. Like it's fucking Superman versus an army. Because the pharaoh was Egypt, so the army was the pharaoh. Like it's a whole thing. And the gods were such a part of everyday life in a way that religion really isn't anymore. Even for most really devout religious people, there are plenty of periods of the day where it's just the non-religious world that you're dealing with, and the gods were a part of every single thing. And I'm sure there were atheists and agnostics in the same way that there are today, but like, when the day might start with your king ritually sacrificing a goat to the gods, which the Argiads did at a couple of points, it's not, it hits a little differently than even, I go to church on Sundays, or in the case of you and I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during this time, Philip starts, as I said, kind of playing the game. And this is the part where we're going to kind of rush through some stuff that would kill a military historian, because I don't really understand it, and I'm not going into each and every goddamn little war that Philip got involved in. But the long and short of it is the Greek city-states had a habit of allying and then betraying each other and then allying again. And this was just what you did. It was whatever helped you gain advantage at the time. Which I had to stop and think about, because I kept being like, why the fuck do people keep allying with him or trusting him? Or, why do they keep... And it's the Greeks didn't understand that they had been playing this game for centuries, and Philip wasn't here to play the game. Philip was here to upend the entire fucking board. They're playing Risk, and he comes in with an actual gun. Like...
Wild card.
Right? So, after securing the borders of Macedon, which had been a problem forever, he besieges the city of Amphipolis, which the Athenians had been trying to conquer. He reaches an agreement with the Athenians to lease the city to them after his conquest, with the idea of like, okay, I conquered the city, which you can't. You can run it, but you have to fucking pay me for it. In exchange, you're going to give me this city of Pydna. However, after conquering Amphipolis, as he said, and taking Pydna, instead of giving it to the Athenians like he promised, he just conquered both cities, pissing off the Athenians.
Yeah.
He allies Macedon with the Chalcodon League of Althenius, which the leagues was just a couple of city-states working together. Kind of like... you know what? I'm going to use NATO as an example. It would never be these three, but they're the three cities I can think of off the top of my head. It'd be like if Sparta, Athens, and Thebes all combined together to counter Russian aggression, or I guess Macedonian aggression, is in the same way that like Britain, France, and America have worked together against Russian aggression a lot. Or, we can comment on the actual nature of modern politics a different day, but that's the example I'm going to use. He then goes on to conquer other cities, but actually does give it to the league that he allied with, because it's not really worth it to start fights with those people. In 357, he marries Olympias, who I'd mentioned, the Molossian snake witch. Yeah. And she's so cool. And the next year, Alexander is born. But to really put into place how little Alexander kind of meant to Philip back in the early days, he wasn't even the first son. This is the same year that Philip's racehorse won the Olympic Games, and they're kind of recorded on the same level of importance.
Oh.
Now, also, the Macedonians had not always been allowed in the Olympic Games because they were Greek, not Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And theoretically, you had to be Greek to the Olympics. He conquers the town of Crenides and changes the name to Philippi, which it is a common thing at the time, but it's something that Alexander would take to extremes of naming cities after yourself. In Egypt, there's legendarily the city of Alexandria. It's the Library of Alexandria that Alexander, I don't remember if he founded that one or just stole it and named it after himself. I'll have that ready for next week. But Alexander named like 10 cities after himself over the course of his conquering.
So you could name it anything. And it's like, how do people even know it's you? Like, I wouldn't assume, maybe it's a different Alexander. Like, I know
It would
some
be like if
Alexes,
I
it could be
conquered
them.
Missoula and named it Zacktown.
Zacktown.
Welcome to Zacktown. Population fucking me. The important thing about capturing Philippi is that he got control of its mines, which gave him a shit ton of gold, which he used to basically conquer all of Greece. During a battle where he's besieging the I almost said planet, Jesus Christ, the town, city, whatever, of Methone, he is injured and loses his right eye, the first of many major injuries that he will take on. It is hard to imagine Philip after you read about him as a young man, because you just think of him as the grizzled, scarred barbarian with years of battle all over his body. At the request of the Thessalian League, which is a different league than he had teamed up with before, he goes in on the Third Sacred War, which is just another fucking imperceptible Greek war. They all blur together. This one takes about 10 years. He travels to Thessaly in order to capture Pegase, and I'm sure those pronunciations are killing someone. And he ends up with an alliance with Thebes, which is the city-state that he had spent years as a hostage in. Right. He later swaps around and destroys Thebes. I might be mixing some stuff there, because again, he's going to Thessaly to help, going to Thessaly to fight, going to Thessaly to help. But by this point, he is putting out an army of 20,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry in one battle, which is...
That's a lot.
Did not exist. The Macedonians could not do this before. He's also building a navy, which the Macedonians had never really had before, because it was just too much work. He's at this point pretty much conquering or allying with everything, although he never quite advanced into central Greece, because the Athenians had occupied Thermopylae, which is where the Battle of the 300 happened back in the day. Basically, it wasn't worth the effort. He's not going into war again quite yet with the Athenians, but it's really becoming clear that that's on its way. In 348, he takes out the city of Olynthus, which was mostly important because his half-brothers Aridas and Melanius were there, and they were his only real challenges to the throne. So it's really kind of fully setting him as the leader of Macedon. He ends up taking out most of the Chalkidian Peninsula, resulting in the Chalkidian League dissolving, which was one of the first leagues he allied with. Having consolidated
Not a
lands...
very reliable guy, is he?
God, it's really... I cannot emphasize
just
how
like,
much...
How would anyone trust this guy? Just be like, oh yeah, this guy has a really good reputation of not fucking people over. We'll ally with you, sure.
That's what I mean of I was like, why didn't they do this? This was the game. This was the Greek city-states would ally with one and then ally with the other and swap around if it would give them advantage. And you kind of would control smaller cities, but the bigger cities would stay in control. And they didn't understand that Philip was playing a different game than they were. He then holds some Olympic Games for a while because he's having fun. Is involved in pretty much at this point every single war going on in Greece, which is impressive because there's about 15 city-states and there's usually about 30 wars happening at any given time.
How big is Greece at this time? Is it like the same size it is now?
It's not big.
Oh my
but the different city-states could not get along for longer than 10 minutes. He will end up utterly smashing Thebes, destroying it almost entirely, taking it out as a major power. Eventually, he's got all the key Greek city-states in submission with the exception of Sparta, and he sends them a message saying, if I invade Laconia, we know Sparta as the Spartans of Sparta today. They were known as the Lacedaemonians back in the day. I do not know why that has changed. But that's where the word laconic comes from, because the Spartans were famous for not speaking more than they had to. But he sends them, if I invade Laconia, I shall turn you out. And their only response was, if. It's like,
if
fucking
good.
Try it, we dare you. Turns out that was a load of horseshit, because he then went and invaded and ejected Spartans from every part of the Greece that Spartans controlled, with the exception of Sparta itself. No one quite knows why he chose to leave. Maybe he was like, that was just a really good line, have fun. But that's where it was. I guess it worked. In 345, in a huge battle, he is seriously wounded in the lower right leg by a soldier and will walk with a limp for the rest of his life. It is important to note here that when your head of state tended to be your main general, and your main general led from the front. The Macedonian cavalry would move basically in a spearhead formation, charging. And at least in Alexander's case, although I believe that Philip did as well, the very tip of the spear, the very first person would be Alexander, would be either the king or the prince or whoever. It would be like if Biden was in the front lines.
Yeah, put him out there.
My cat wants it.
Serve your country.
He conquers some Thracian settlements and gives it the name Philippopolis, which is incredible.
Philippopolis?
Name. Philippopolis.
Philippopolis. Philippopolis.
Philippopolis. Philippopolis.
Philosophicus. All right, I could do this all day. I gotta go. Keep rolling.
He's known as Plovdiv.
As what?
Let's see. These days it's known as Plovdiv. Conquers Byzantium, conquers this, conquers that. Anyways, he eventually forms the League of Corinth, which is a Greek confederation that is basically the Macedonian Empire of Greece. But they weren't saying it was because the Greeks were fucking touchy about the fact that they didn't understand they were being conquered. And it was a lot easier to be like, yep, we're a League of Nations. We're like the UN, but I just happen to be in charge of it. And he starts talking about how he is going to conquer Persia. Or not even conquer Persia, it's that we are going to get revenge against Persia for the Greek-Persian Wars 200 years ago. Which, again, is utter horseshit. Because they've been working for the Persians and allying with the Persians and getting money from the Persians for centuries at this point. But the Greeks were so pissed that the Persians were the only people to ever really invade their mainland that they've been holding this grudge for centuries. And the moment someone is able to unite them, they're like, sure, yeah, well, it's because they invaded us centuries ago that we're going to invade them now, not because we're fucking war hungry and want their money and land and everything. Every Greek city-state is united in this, with the exception of Sparta, because Sparta wasn't willing to come play unless Sparta could be in charge. The members agree to never wage war against each other unless it's to suppress revolution, which will not last Philip's death, because Alexander will have to take over them almost immediately. But during this time, he starts sending soldiers to the Persian mainland, to Asia, really, to begin setting up a beachhead to take over. Now, he knows quite a bit about Persian lands because for about 20 years, he's been taking Persian refugees, people kicked out by the King of Kings at the time, Artaxerxes III, and letting them live in the Macedonian court and taking care of them, and in return, they're telling him everything they know about Persia. And considering they were in the Persian court before this, they know a lot. Now, this is setting up to be a huge battle, like this great boxing match between Artaxerxes III, who has been around forever, and he's been leading Persia for years and solidifying it after centuries of them kind of growing weaker. And here's Philip of Macedon, who has spent the last 30 years uniting Greece in a way that no one has ever been able to do before. It's this huge battle, and then both of them are assassinated within a year of each other.
If.
Which is really part of the reason why Alexander was able to do what he was able to do, because everything was chaotic. Now, Philip is assassinated in 336 BCE at the ancient capital of Macedon. Now, we know how he was assassinated. We don't really know who was behind it. He was there to celebrate the marriage of Alexander I of Epirus, which is not related to his family, and Cleopatra of Macedon, who was one of his daughters and one of Alexander's sisters. Now, he's entering the town square. There are statues of the Greek gods around him, and this grizzled old man enters the town square completely unarmored, which is rare, because he's in the homeland. He's showing that all of Greece loves him. I don't need to be afraid. I can drive down Dallas with the top down. I totally won't get shot in the head. And he immediately is stabbed. He is stabbed by Pausanias of Orestes, which is one of his top bodyguards. Now, there has been multiple reasons given. The main one is that Pausanias had a lover who was sexually assaulted by another man who is confusingly also named Pausanias. The other man was basically lightly punished, let off for the crime by Philip, and has said that Pausanias held a grudge. Now, that is almost certainly not the whole reason he killed Alexander, because he was one of Alexander's top bodyguards, and he waited.
Wait, you mean Philip?
Yes, sorry, Philip. He was one of Philip's top bodyguards, and he waited 10 to 15 years after this moment of being wronged to...
Yeah, seems fishy.
...to get his revenge. What I think is most likely, and it's thought that almost certainly someone paid him, and it probably because of this ancient grudge, this 10-year grudge he's been nursing, he was like, sure, I'll stab the fuck out of that guy if you give me good money.
Oh, you think you're gonna get away with that shit though? Really? What are you gonna do with that money when you're dead?
I do wonder if it was we'll take care of your family or something, but he almost escapes. He has horses waiting. He trips over a root while running to his horse. And is repeatedly stabbed to death. It is unclear who paid for him. A lot. Well, he did just stab a king in the middle. It is unclear who paid. A lot of people thought maybe the Persians, because it wasn't uncommon. Assassination is super common in Persian society to deal with a problem. So, hey, this guy's going to invade us. What if we stab him a bunch of times, and then his son's not going to be a problem, right? Whoops. The other thoughts are it could have been Alexander or his mother Olympias, Philip's wife, because murdering to gain the throne was never uncommon, and Olympias fucking hated Philip, to the point that she left emotional remembrances on the grave of Philip's assassin. She puts fucking flowers on his grave, basically, being like, hey, thanks, owe you one.
Do you think maybe there's something to that? Is that a theory?
Yeah, it's thought that could be Olympias and Alexander. I don't know. I think it could easily have been the Persians. It could easily have been Alexander or Olympias. Olympias is a stone cold bitch who would have no problem killing people later on if she thought it would gain advantage for Alexander or Alexander's children after Alexander's death. So she would not hesitate for a second. It is insanely high risk for her if she does. If the Persians do it and they fail to assassinate him, he's going to invade them already, whatever. If she does it, she's going to be like, and it fails, and she's caught, she's going to be like flayed alive or some shit like that. So it is high risk, high reward. But as I said, and I say this in the most glowing terms possible, she was a cold bitch. She had absolutely no problem with murdering anyone if it made her line, not her husband, but her line, go further.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically where we're going to end it today. Alexander has just taken the throne. He has the greatest army the Greek world has ever seen that daddy's money can buy. He has experience because he was leading the cavalry while Philip conquers Thebes and smashes it to the ground. And he is a megalomaniacal, at this point, not quite a drunk, who basically wanted to fucking murder his way across the world. By the end of this, he will be completely detached from reality, thinking that he is an actual god.
Those guys are always the most interesting. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't have cult documentaries, you know?
Yeah, there's a very Jim Jones element to him.
I'm excited to psychoanalyze him in my head a little bit with my Psych 101 class degree.
Perfect. You're utterly qualified.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome, Zach. Well, thank you so much for telling us all of this history. I started taking notes and then I was like, nah, that's work.
It is my absolute pleasure to ramble minorly coherently about shit that I love reading about. So,
and we will have you back. It'll be, I don't know how long it'll be between recording, but it'll be a month for the listeners. So, woohoo.
That's a wrap for this month's episode of Talking Shit About. We'll be back September 1st, which is the day before my wedding. Please, if you haven't yet, rate and subscribe. That helps people find the podcast. When I tell them, hey, I have a podcast, and I try not to. I don't want to be that guy, but also, like, I don't know. I put a lot of work into it, you know? I edit, I record, I do all of this shit myself. It's a hobby. I don't want ads because I don't want to make money off people's stories. I just do this for fun. And it would be really fucking cool if those handful of people that I tell I have a podcast, that they can just find it when they search for it. I don't have to be like, okay, give me your number so I can send you the link. That's my agenda here. If you would like to come on the show, you can email me at killizabeth.pod@gmail.com. That's KILLIZABETH.POD@gmail.com. I'm pretty sure that's right. I'm trying to frantically check my notes, but it's in the show description, so you're fine. You'll find it. All right, see you in October. Bye.